to this final event of this season for Open Eco Homes for CCF. And it's our OEH Retrospective. And we've got a great lineup of 3 speakers tonight. And I'm going to pass you to our host, Chris.
Good evening, everyone. And again, welcome to this Open Eco Homes online talk. We're taking a retrospective on a number of the homes which have featured in the Open Eco Homes program over a number of years. I'm Chris, I'm chairing the session, and Melinda will be collaborating with me, doing technical support and also keeping an eye on the chat stream when we come to look at our question and answer session. We're very pleased to have with us tonight 3 former hosts of Open Eco Homes. You can see their names on screen: Cray, Shaun, Lindsay, and Ian Collins, each with a talk about their own experience, their own homes over a number of years. They'll be sharing with us what they've learned over those years, what they would do differently now, and of course their successes in reducing carbon and energy in their homes. Just before we hear from our contributors, there's a few items for housekeeping to share with you. First of all, we'd like you all please to remain muted throughout unless you're called upon to clarify a question or make a comment. So write questions and comments in the chat stream, and that will enable us to answer them as efficiently as possible when we come to our question and answer session about halfway through. And if appropriate, please indicate to which speaker you are directing your questions. Again, that might be helpful to know that. Please note that we are recording this meeting, although your name label will not appear in the recording. We welcome seeing you throughout this session, but you can choose, if you wish, to not appear, and to do this, of course, use your stop video button on Zoom. Finally, a package of material from this meeting will be mailed in a day or two to everyone who has signed up for this talk. It'll comprise the edited recording of this session, the chat stream, and the slides, which you'll be seeing in the course of the 3 presentations. Our 3 speakers, as you can see from our agenda, will each speak for about 10 minutes. And after we've heard from all of them, we'll be having around 15 to 20 minutes of question and answer, which will take us close to our finishing time of 8 o'clock. As mentioned before, please write questions in the chat stream, and then we'll tackle them all as much as possible during our question and answer session. So time to get going, and I'd like to invite Ian Cray, this one, to give us his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris, for the introduction, and thanks to Melinda for keeping an eye on things in the background here. My story started, well, gosh, 15 years ago. Like many, I saw the Al Gore film, and that sort of triggered a whole series of thoughts in my mind. That led to us making a decision to move to a new home, partly by the Al Gore film, but for other reasons as well. And we were very fortunate to work with a mainstream developer that allowed us to make significant changes to the internal layout of the building. And at that time, back in 2010, install a heat pump and a solar array. That whole process was subject to a case study, and the case study for Open Eco Homes was in 2013. And you'll see in the chat a link to that document. So what I would like to do is reflect on the last 10 years and what we've been working on. I have 3 slides. Hopefully we'll see them in a moment. The 3 slides cover what we've been up to in the last, thank you, next slide, please. What we've been up to in the last 10 years, what the outcome has been, and also some learnings and some observations. If we could go back one slide, please. That slide's great. So here in summary form, it seems quite remarkable, actually, because all these things require lots of planning, lots of thinking, lots of disruption in the home from time to time. But to put them in a very clean slide, it would suggest it was an easy journey. And that's not been the case, and there's been lots of learnings on the way through. But in summary form, you'll see there, 2010, we conducted a significant redesign of the internal layout of the building, and I can talk more about that in the chat when we get to that point in Q&As. We did install a heat pump, much to many people's non-comprehension of why we would do that with gas prices at levels that we probably will never see again, and a solar PV array. In 2016, we purchased an EV, and I've put two things here which might not seem remarkable, but I think have been pretty significant to enabling us to the outcomes that I'm going to share with you shortly. In 2018, we installed a fully functioning, and I stress that, fully functioning smart meter, and that's enabled a whole host of things to happen. One, it's allowed me as a homeowner to have a much better understanding of our demand for electricity, and also it's allowed me to frame decisions, particularly around the home battery and the size of the battery, and both in terms of the dischargeable kilowatt hours that we're storing and also the power that it discharges at, the inverter size. They may seem insignificant, but I can tell you, if I didn't have that smart meter and the recording of the data, I would have probably not made the decision I made in terms of size of the battery. The other thing the smart meter does, it provides you to the really, really rich world of tariffs in the electricity market. Compared to the gas market, we know that the gas pricing is constant throughout the day, 210, 211 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour being emitted out of the boiler, whereas with electricity, there's an increasing number of different themed tariffs aimed at EVs, tariffs for running optimum performance of heat pumps, tariffs aimed at reducing carbon content, and without the smart meter in place, would simply not be able to access that rich environment of tariffs. The 2021 install of the Homely controller, again, there's a link in the chat, but the Homely controller runs my heat pump now. So for 10 years, I was running it myself. Controls back in 2010 on a heat pump were rather basic. New heat pumps have a lot more controls, certainly have a lot more machine learning attached to them. And the Homely was me retrofitting my heat pump to have an eye on future weather patterns, desired temperature in the house, the Homely itself recording the performance of the house, and the Homely also looking at the tariff and the carbon content at different times of the day to decide when to bring electricity into the house. And then in 2022, again, there's a link in the chat, a blog link that Nicola and through Transition Energy kindly produced, records the thinking around the home battery and the benefits that home battery provides to us as a homeowner, and frankly, to the grid in terms of helping the grid in my little small way of grid balancing. And then there's some notes here of what I think's ahead, and we can perhaps talk about that on the final slide. Next slide, please. I've called this a grand thing called an energy statement, but I thought it would be helpful just to give you a sense of what's been achieved through this journey and the current annual performance. So our building's a stacked building over 3 floors. You can see it on the left there. It's just under 265 square meters. It has a flat roof with a small parapet wall, and sitting on the roof are the panels and the external heat pump in the southwest corner. It's in the southwest corner to minimize shading and frankly, minimizing the disruption to the pipework that comes into the house. And we have a home battery on the ground floor, where we have our internal living space, both on the ground and the middle floor of the building. Prior to the changes that were thankfully put through the developer during the build, the EPC on the standard build was an EPC B with estimated gas usage of 24,000 kilowatt hours and electricity of around 6,000. This is a rather, it's a large building, but the percentages are typical to many homes in the UK today, with gas representing the highest percentage of the total energy. Today, we're running at a 74% lower usage, 74%. And in terms of the mix, because of electricity representing 90% of the electricity, and electricity today consistently has a lower carbon content than gas, the carbon emissions are somewhat closer to 80 to 85% lower than they would have been if we'd had the conventional build and the conventional layout that the developer was selling at the time. So as a result of that, our annual bills, these are not capital. No, there's no capital streams in this. This is simple revenue streams. Our annual bill is close to £750. In the summer months, it's about a £300 credit, and in the winter, from now until mid-April, during the heating season, is just over £1,000. And that's at the current Ofgem pricing, with the application of the appropriate tariff that we're on for the winter season. And you can see there that carbon is just under a tonne, and no credit is taken here for the exported PV, which, like many PV arrays on domestic homes, represents somewhere between 40 to 60%. In our case, it's slightly less than 50%, but we've taken no credit for the exported PV back to the grid, which you could argue is a carbon credit. But probably most importantly is we think it's a much more pleasant living environment. The movement of the living space predominantly onto the middle floor gives us lots of natural light. We have rooms that have good airflow, and we also have rooms that provided with solar gain in the winter, and in the summer months we work hard to keep them cool, and I can talk more about our approach to that if there are questions on that. And of course, the other feature is with a heat pump. For those who have heat pumps will probably know, the general feeling is that you run them regularly at low temperatures, and you see very little fluctuation in the wintertime living environment temperature. Next slide, please. So my observations, or I call them observations rather than learnings, I think. My observations are, if it's possible, when you're thinking about a retrofit, see what you can do to change the layout to accommodate light, air, and solar gain. Recognizing one might have to be concerned about summer periods, but if one's possible in the retrofit planning, think about your layout if it's at all possible. Clearly, the subsequent work on the fabric of the building, then once one's got an idea of energy demand, think about the transfer across, if one's possible, to an all-electric solution for heating. My observations, and I say this from a perspective of in 2010, it was rather an uninformed decision. It was more a decision I wished to just do it, is to think, I had very little data about the performance of the building. Now, with the use of the smart meter, also with increasingly people are offering opportunities for people to become part of tests and research for data capture in their homes to look at the thermal performance of their buildings. I think the environment today provides people who are interested with the opportunity to capture much more data, and through that become more confident in decisions they're making at the time, and also allowing them to, what I call, perform post-install evaluations. The other feature that's happened over the last decade is there's been a significant uptick in machine learning, and the whole notion of smart needs obviously to be looked at closely. The word is often thrown around for things that perhaps aren't as smart as they are, but there are features, and I would point at the Homely controller in my case, where it's not just managing the demand side, how much heat needs to be brought into the building by looking at weather, looking at the losses through the building during the day and learning about that. It's also looking at the supply side. When should the electricity be brought into the building? And how can one look at that from a price and a carbon perspective? Then two points about the battery. And again, there's more details in the blog, but there's a session next week that goes into much more detail on this for those who are interested. The winter period definitely creates an opportunity to take low carbon, low pricing electricity in at periods during the day to hold in the battery to take you over the hump of dirty electricity, which most people cite as between 4 and 7 p.m. in the winter, but there are other periods during the day as well. So the battery provides two opportunities in the winter for price and for a carbon arbitrage of bringing in lower carbon from the grid and making it use of it yourself. Now, clearly, who knows what the next 10 years will bring? Hopefully, there will be a big uptick in smart government policy, and we might see storage on a wider scale. But for the moment, there's an opportunity for homeowners to think of the battery for that. And similarly, in the summer period, if you do have a PV array, rather than allowing the solar to be exported in real time, the export amounts, there's an opportunity to hold it in the battery and send it back to the grid when the grid values it more highly. There's times during the day, later in the day in the summer, where the grid will pay you a premium, and also it'll help offset higher carbon generated electricity with higher carbon content in the grid. Two more points from me before I move to the next speaker. One is the notion of what I would call the time of use tariff is increasingly broadening between high and low pricing, and that provides an opportunity for those that are able to make use of those tariffs, either through taking electricity into the building directly and putting it into the building as a heat store, or holding it in a battery for making use later within the 24-hour cycle. Clearly we've seen a spike in pricing with the problems of Ukraine, and we're not sure what's coming next. But in my case, I made the decision on a high-low delta of 10 pence, and what we've seen over the last 18 months is a significant divergence from that, at sometimes as much as 25 pence between high and low pricing per kilowatt hour. And then my final point is basically a plea. It's not absolutely relevant for tonight, but if we all had a chance to press policymakers to push harder on wind generation, I think we would be able to move what often is heralded as a good performance on reduction of carbon intensity through the electricity grid. But frankly, it's like all these things, the last 20% is the hardest to achieve. And we have stalled, and whatever we can do to help that as individuals, as citizens, I think we should. And then I've referenced the latest Royal Society report on large-scale energy storage that you might find of interest. I think that I've got to my point. I've probably exceeded my timing, and I apologise for that, Chris.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. That's very helpful. We'll now move directly on to Shaun
May I
Lindsay.
ask, Chris, I'm so sorry to interrupt. May I add one question that's just come through the chat before we move on, just so it's...
I think, can we hold questions to
the
talks? I think we planned it that way. Thank you. Yes, let's move now to Shaun Lindsay and be talking about the retrofitting of the 1960s whole house where he lives.
Good
Shaun.
evening. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Ian. Right. So, God knows how many years ago we bought our 1960s house, and it was performing terribly. So we went on a journey trying to improve things one thing at a time. I liked the idea of solar, so I got solar, and then it sort of snowballed on from there. So we've done all these different items to our house. Everything has been done in its own right, rather than as a whole. And if I was going back in time, I would, like Ian said, I would consider the layout of the property and design that in. But going into the bits we've done. So when we got our house, I installed solar PV early in 2012, then cavity walls, hybrid cars. We did some major reconstruction to relay out our rooms to get more of the sun, and also to make it flow a bit better. At the same time, we put the MVHR in. Then I did a passive solar thing to heat our hot water, and decided I'll go for our first full electric car. That worked so well, we bought a second one, and then bought a Zappy to use the solar energy into that battery. That was working so well, but I was still exporting some electric. I thought, oh, we can have another battery. So we installed a house battery in 21, and that's made a huge world of difference in savings. We switched down to a single electric car because we considered having two cars was inappropriate. I thought that was so we went down to one car family. I then increased the size of the house battery because what they sold me was clearly not enough. And I literally this year have finished installing a further 2 kilowatts of solar panels and did that myself and wired it all up and got it registered with the grid. So that is possible. You can do it by yourself. So solar is by far the simplest and immediate direct reduction to bills. It was a no-brainer for us. It was very little effort. Went in, our bills dropped by a third. I would recommend that to everybody if you can do it. The solar thermal, which you can see just here, is that is another boon and great if you're going to have an air source heat pump, because it reduces the demand on the air source heat pump, or the high temperature demand particularly. And so they have a lot smaller unit being installed in our house probably next year. MVHR, can't sing its praises high enough. That has been the biggest improvement to our life. Yes, it does save some money, but it stops mold, it stops dust running around the house, smells disappear, the list goes on. And the lack of condensation, which you can seal all the windows so there's no drafts, and we even dry our clothes indoors. But the reason we did it was not for environmental reasons, it was actually just to get rid of the allergens, because my wife and my daughter have serious allergies to various things. But yeah, I would never ever buy a house without one nowadays. Power and battery, you'll hear this from all of us, it is great, and using the energy at the right times can really save you some money and make you money. And if you combine that with the Zappy is actually aware of the battery, and you can program it either way to either use the power or not, or combine it. The way we've done it is it charges the house battery first and then charges the car battery with any electric after that. I've also added some small low wattage heaters as well, because in the winter that helps reduce the demand on the main heating system if I've got loads spare. Have I jumped too many? No, that's right. Insulation wise, we did, like I say, we did some extensions and some major building works. During that building works, we used thermalite bricks with Celotex in the cavity. That made a world of difference. Can't think that one's praise is high enough. it's massively, it's better than cavity wall insulation by a long way. We've still got some bits that are cavity wall insulated. In the loft, we decided to go easy, and we left the glass fibre between the rafters because it's just a pain to try and cut everything to size. And then we overboarded with Kingspan. So there's 100 mil of Kingspan, and this is the loft hatch, which is full depth one, and you can see the Kingspan's way beyond that. And then just have a floating board on top. That produces well over the insulation they recommend, and amazingly it holds quite well, and you can walk on that. And in there you can see the MVHR unit and the collectors. So you have one for in, one for out, and they run to every room. I then insulated the entire thing at the top rafters as well, so it's a semi-warm loft. So I've insulated the bottom and the top, so it's very well. I was then thinking about we found a lot of solar gain, so we put the interglazed blinds in. So every one of our south-facing windows has glazing inside the double glazing. That makes a big difference and reduces the solar gain quite considerably, as well as it does actually help in winter as well, because it stops the circulation of air within the glazing. So they're very, very performant. But I would recommend plants and trees. They affect things far more than any hard landscaping you can do, as you'll probably hear later on. But my first point of call is always insulate first. How do we now compare? So a little graph I did showing you what the electric is. So everything in green is PV related. So what we've done that. Everything blue is overnight rate, as in cheap rate electric, and then normal grid is this orangey colour. Our PV doesn't generate enough for us to go completely solar, even with the battery. It's better now. I've increased the PV on the house, but it still shows you that the actual, it's a tiny portion of mains grid at the peak rate that we pay. Where we were is when we first moved in, it was we were low E, and it was bad. It was a very cold house, and then gradually over the years, you can see with all those measures, I've moved from one to the next, and then we're currently on around 55 kilowatts per square meter, which brings us down to there. So we're bang on. And as Ian said, the average in the UK of a brand new build is 120, so it's quite poor. It's a B % average. Generally, the house is now a lot more comfortable to live in. It's less cleaning, which means we've switched our cleaning fluids to white vinegar and the various things they recommend. My wife would know more about that, so we don't use any harsh cleaning products. They're all natural now. But it does help not having mold and various other things that you have to battle with it. It is amazing having an MVHR with lack of mold. Our bathrooms were built nearly 7 years ago now, and we haven't got any mold on them still. So 7 years, nothing. It is incredible. Maintenance does run a lot less, and the running costs, we're not doing quite as well as Ian Cray, but we're down to about £80 a month of combined bill, and that includes the running costs of our electric car, which we're doing about 800 miles to 1,000 miles a month. So £80 a month is the combined of everything in a 5-bed. We're not quite as large. We're about 136 square meters in a 5-bed. Right, that is it. But going forward, I never stop. So MVHR, yes, we've done that, but I found some issues with that when you go to extreme temperatures either side, and so you can have a pre-cool and preheating system, which will reduce your energy usage even more. We're growing some trees to try and shade the house a little bit more. we're engaging with a couple of people. If I've got an engineer tomorrow coming around about the air source heat pump, and they're very excited because we've got so much already going on. There's a few installations, so thermal cameras. Yeah, rent out one of our thermal cameras from carbon footprint. Every time I've got my own camera. In fact, my phone has a thermal imaging camera built in. I go around every year, every winter, to see whether I can improve anything. So I will be improving the installation yet again in thermal bridges I've found. But then in summer, we're looking at house cooling, because the tail end of it is, we've discovered, is you insulate it, you close it all down, and if you get 40 odd degrees, it's very hard to cool the house down again. And so yeah, we've learned our lesson on that, and so we need to work with that. That sums up everything, and I shall pass back to Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shaun. Move directly on to our final contributor, who's Ian Collins, and he'll be talking about work on the Madingley Road house, which was, I believe, a bespoke new build when he moved in. So, Ian, please. You're muted, Ian.
Okay.
Okay.
So good evening, everyone. Here is a picture not of the house but of the tree that provides solar shading in the summer. When we started out thinking about building a house, we had a 1930 very conventional brick-built house with a large garden, and we were just rather dissatisfied generally with the performance of the house, both in terms of its connection with the outdoors, which is very important to us, and its sustainability. So we got planning permission to build in our back garden. And if we move on to the next slide, the elements that of the building are these. We actually commenced the design in 2005, though we didn't occupy it until 2010. It's a single story, it's timber frame, it's L-shaped. That is, the design of the house in that sense is totally dominated by the requirements of the site. It's in a back garden, it therefore needs to be inconspicuous, and there are numerous trees around which constrain where you can actually build because of the tree roots. So it's actually a very poor shape for thermal efficiency and airtightness. It's just every room has at least one external wall, and some have three, I think. But one way in which or the ways in which we counteracted that was by serious levels of insulation and really making it a passive solar design. So we have large amounts of glazing looking south from the kitchen dining area and looking east from the living area. The bedrooms look west and so have much less solar gain. I'll talk a bit more about solar gain perhaps at the end, but I think that's a big issue that does need to be addressed in any house. We put in a ground source heat pump. I should say that we didn't want to use any fossil fuels, so it has no gas to the house. And ground source heat pump, because that seemed to be the most efficient way of converting electricity into heat. We have mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. Again, I echo everything that's been said about that. Excellent. Solar hot water. We found for a family of 4, we got most of our hot water for about 8 months a year, and virtually nothing for the 4 winter months. We also decided that we didn't like the wastefulness of using rainwater, so in such a profligate manner, for flushing toilets and things. So we collect rainwater from the roof, and we recycle that in the toilets and in the garden. And that cut our water usage down to about 55 litres per person per day, which I think is substantial, probably only about 40% of the UK average. We also put a green roof on a good part of the building, again, to reduce its visual impact from surrounding properties and to provide some biodiversity to replace the garden that had been lost by building on it. And very much enjoyed seeing what happened on that green roof. Let's move on to the next slide. So I should say we don't live there anymore, we've moved. But for 13 years, everything worked, which is always nice to know, isn't it? So the original systems are all in place. That's to say, the ground source heat pump, the MVHR system, the solar hot water system, and the rainwater recycling system. I've done no maintenance at all on the ground source heat pump or the MVHR, apart from changing filters. On the rainwater recycling, because you're collecting water off of a flat roof, there's a lot of other stuff lands up on the roof as well. And so occasionally I would clean out the bottom of the rainwater tank, just simply by dropping a pump down and dumping it. And the overall energy use has turned out to be quite close to passive house levels, even though it's not a passive house design. And that's really, I think, because of the fantastic benefit of solar. Really, you can really collect a lot of heat from the sun, even on cloudy days, if you've got a lot of glazing facing it. So moving on to the last slide. What are the problems with that? Of course, the problem with collecting heat from the sun is you get it when you don't want it in the summer. Now, the advantage of our house was that the south-facing windows face a liquid amber tree, large tree, probably 30 meters tall, and a lot of the summer sun is kept out of the kitchen area by that tree. And of course, conveniently, being a deciduous tree, it obliges you by letting the winter sun straight into the property in the sort of December to March, April months. If I was still living there, I would definitely be incorporating solar electricity and battery storage. I think that's a no-brainer. We decided not to do it originally. There was some solar shading, it was complicated, and we had enough on our plates, really. But I think, as has been said, the opportunities of tariffs that vary with time of use and so on and so forth are such that solar panels and battery storage are a really good idea. I think summer cooling, there's a couple of comments I would make there. Firstly, we've got these boreholes that go down into the ground that we're pushing fluid through. And that, where they are in the ground, about 40 meters down, it's only about 11 degrees, even in the summer. So why not have a system where you use that cooling radiator to cool your house? And I think if you had a ground source system, that would be an intriguing possibility for the future. Regarding MVHR, I think MVHR is ineffective for cooling. It doesn't push enough heat into or extract enough heat from the house. And often MVHR inlets are placed just above a roof, in our case, just above a black roof, which is soaking up the sun. And so you're actually pulling in air, which is higher than ambient temperature in the summer. And again, I think it'd be intriguing, wouldn't it, if that input system actually came through 20 meters in the ground before it got into your house to cool the incoming air in the summer. So I think and both that and the ground source borehole, using the ground source boreholes, they're both essentially passive methods of cooling. I have this sort of inbuilt objection to air conditioning. I think that's inappropriate. I like to have all the doors open in the summer anyway. So I think solar shading and maybe cooling floors through ground source cooling could be a nice way forward. But as I say, we've moved on, so we're not actually going to be doing these things. I think that's all I'll say in view of the time.
Thank you very much, Ian. And thanks again to all three of our contributors for some very interesting and inspiring talks. Just before we move to the question and answer session, let me please encourage you to feed in as many questions as you have. We'll try and tackle them all. This, I think, is one of the great benefits of these types of events, that getting your own personal questions tackled is a very useful thing to come away with. So we've got about another 15 minutes for a question and answer session. I can see already that there's been quite a number put in the chat. So let's hand over now to Melinda, and she'll call for, or she'll put questions to the speakers from that list. Melinda.
Thanks so much, Chris. Right, thank you very much to all the questions received so far. I've got a couple of questions firstly for Ian. Shaun, would you be able to go back to Ian in Cray's last slide? Because the questions seem to be pertinent to that. So Michael, thank you. You asked, Ian, could you talk about what size your battery is, please? Ian Cray.
I'd be happy. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think the first thing I'd say is deciding on the size of the battery is probably best done when you know what your electricity demand is going to become. I use the word to become because there may be actions that you've got underway to reduce gas, for instance, moving to hopefully a non-fossil fuel heating system, and having a sense of what your electricity demand is going to be. And I think batteries are going to work better when you've got a larger pool of electricity. That said, I've sized our battery not to meet Christmas Day's demand, where everything is running, heating, cooking, everything. Oh, by the way, sizing has two dimensions. It has how much you're going to store, kilowatt hours, dischargeable kilowatt hours, and at what rate you're going to discharge it at to meet the power demand in the house. I can give you the specifics on mine. Mine's a 15 kilowatt hour battery, 5 kilowatt hour modules stacked. Many batteries now come in modular form, which gives you the flexibility. However, they don't give flexibility on the inverter. So having a good sense of what your power demand is, because I've heard stories of people happily taking in from the grid at 3 kilowatts, which is the standard inbound flow from the grid, charging their battery up, and then realizing that they can't actually discharge to meet the needs at 5:30 or 6 p.m. in the evening, when the oven's on, maybe the kettle's on, the kids are home, schools. So being aware of what your power demand is at peak is something to think about. The inverter doesn't come in modular form. And of course, they can be replaced, but that's expense and frankly, it's waste. So that would be my observation. I hope that's a thorough answer. I could have given you the number, but I thought it's probably best to understand the context.
Brilliant. Thank you. Does that answer the questions that were given from John and Michael? I assume it does, unless you write anything else. I'm going to move to one more question for you, Ian, and it was concerning your strategy for cooling in the summer from Rosemary.
Oh my goodness, this is an ever emerging solution, isn't it? So our strategy is, and I think Ian Collins mentioned it at the end, airflow, windows open, flow. Ideally find rooms that have got a good flow in them. We also use passive, so we use internal blinds and curtains. We also use rooms to sleep in which are cooler. Now, of course, some people don't have that choice, and I understand that completely. I too have an aversion to anything mechanical and air conditioning, but regrettably, it seems to me that some homes have not been built appropriately. You know, there are many, many homes, even in the last 10 years, built in Cambridge that doesn't have cross ventilation. I think we may finding ourselves with air conditioning units appearing at a rapid rate. But that's our strategy: try and sleep in cool rooms and airflow and passive to stop solar gain when it gets really, really warm.
Thank you very much. That again, for anybody that might have missed it at the beginning of the talk. And moving on to questions. Oh, sorry, Ian, did you want to add one more thing before I move on to Shaun's?
I think it's in the chat as well, but if I could plug, if there are people really interested in batteries, I guess with Nicola, who's present tonight on this, we're doing a review of my experience of running a battery for the last 21 months on Monday evening. Mm-hmm.
That's right, at Downing Place at 8 o'clock. Downing Place you'll find just off Downing Street on the left. Fantastic. Shaun, we've got some questions for you now. The first one is, was the Celotex insulation retrofitted into cavity walls, and if so, how?
No, we rebuilt. So when we extended, we put the Celotex in as we built the wall. Where we did cut in some windows, we did try and push the Celotex down round where the cavity wall insulation was missing when we did all the repair work, but that's as far as we went. The rest of it is still just cavity wall, blown rock wall.
Brilliant, thank you. And could you, this is from Nicola, please could you explain the pre-cool post-heat on MVHR?
Yeah, that's quite an exciting one. I found a little solution that actually both Ians will quite like this. It looks like a ground source heat pump system, but it's not a heat pump. So what I found is it's like a little car radiator that's about, I don't know, 18 inches by 18 inches. And it goes in your MVHR air intake. And so the air intake flows through this radiator. Then they put brine loop through some pipes, and you put a pipe down underground. Now you only need about 100 meters of pipes, and it only needs to be about 1.5 meters, 2 meters deep. But that brine will get to roughly 8 to 10 degrees, even a couple of meters down. And that's enough to take it off freezing. So if you've got -5 outside, that's enough to bring it above freezing. And in summer, having 8-10 degree water brine flowing through a radiator is enough to bring the temperature right down to just above the dew point. So if it's 40 degrees outside, they reckon from the tests it brings it down to about 28 coming in. And a good MVHR system like ours has some cooling in it by using some kind of piezoelectric mechanism, and so it does enough cooling. So they think that solution would do the preheat and pre-cool problems you get with an MVHR.
That's been discussed on the ACAN chat a little bit amongst the architects. So looking forward to seeing that, you installing that and showing it to all us. Brilliant. We've got a general question from Nicola, which I'm going to leave until after Ian Collins' questions, if I may. Ian, Nicola asks, does your MVHR have a summer bypass?
Yes, it does. Yeah. So you're not heating up the incoming air with the outgoing air in the summer. It definitely has the changeover function there. Yeah. But even so, you're still pulling in air that's warmer than ambient from off your roof.
Very good, thank you. And then we like to ask you from Mick, what size is your water storage tank?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to size, actually. and I did some sort of calculations based on rainwater usage and how long I wanted it to last and so on and so forth, which kind of helped. So we ended up with the rainwater tank, which is 4,250 litres or 4¼ tonnes. There is a bit of a quirk in that because it's so low, it tends to refill from groundwater even when there's no rain. So the actual capacity is effectively more than that, but I've no idea by how much. But I think in 13 years it only ran out once.
Oh, very good, very interesting. We have a general question from Nicola for all three speakers now. Has anyone had trouble with the solar water, hot water? Nicola's experience of solar thermal panels is some air in the pipe several times. So for each of the three speakers, I'm not sure if anybody's got solar thermal apart from Shaun.
I have, and yeah, Nicola's right. You do get some bubbles sometimes in the fluid, but that's normally because they've not sealed things properly. So I had, after about 5 years of settling, I had to have an engineer out that just to re-tighten everything and then flush that through, and it was fine then for the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, so we had it as well in Madingley Road, and I guess we were more fortunate. It certainly got a little bit noisier and sounds like it's got bubbles in it. But I monitored the running time, and it was still running for as many hours a year after 13 years as it was when we started. So, and that's a proxy for heat output. So I think the performance was fine, and it never needed topping up or anything. But I guess that was an evacuated tube collector. I assume that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. If you're interested, I did some work this year on the output of those because mine's about 1.8 meters by 1.8, and I worked out how much heat was actually pumping in, and that is about 2.5 kilowatts it produces.
Wow. Very good. Thank you very much for those responses. And we have an interesting question from Ian, another Ian L. What are people's thoughts on return on investment? Would you each like to take that in turn, starting with Ian Cray?
I'm tempted to offer a frivolous answer, but I shan't. I would say I've always had an eye on the returns. Starting with large capital expenditures on the heat pump and the solar system. And one could say, well, unfortunately, I have some capital. I've tended to think that if it's within 10 years, I'm prepared to do it. And that's partly because we just moved into the home, and we certainly didn't expect to be moving out. As it happens, we've been in the house now close to 14 years. So I think that's my horizon. I know that there's much chat about returns, and but that's my view.
Thanks, Ian. Shaun.
Very similar view. So, but generally, most of the stuff we did were not for financial gain. It was more of a lifestyle choice. Particularly, you won't get much financial return off an MVHR system. But the later add-ons that I added on are mainly because we made so much. We benefited within 5 years, so therefore my further investments, I literally, like Ian said, if it's less than 10 years, I will buy another bit.
Ian, do you have one more comment to that before I go to Ian Collins, or not? No.
It was, sorry to interrupt. The other thing to note is that over the last 10, 12 years, the electricity market's become much more, I've said it at the beginning and I'll say it again, much more dynamic. And actually, it's a very more, it favours those who have moved to electricity away from gas, and it favours those who've invested in equipment that supports an electricity-based home. And that, I think, has meant that the returns are speeding up. They're not going further out. Capital costs are falling, and returns through the tariffs are meaning that your return period is shortening.
Thanks, Ian. Ian Collins.
Yeah, I don't think I ever made any sort of return on investment calculations. As it turned out, we were very fortunate because the government introduced a backdated renewable heat incentive scheme after we'd put the systems in, which we qualified for. And in fact, for the 7 years, I think we got about £15,000 for our heat pump, and can't remember, £4,000 for our solar hot water system, and those sums of money pretty well paid for the installation costs. So I've no idea what incentives there are now, but that was clearly a factor in making them very attractive. NVHR had no such incentives, nor does rainwater recycling. Rainwater recycling only makes financial sense because the water company charges you for your sewage on the basis that 90% of the water you buy from them goes back out again as sewage. So if you flush your toilets with water you've provided yourself, of course, they're not charging you for the sewage from that.
Very good.
And that's where you can make a modest return on rainwater recycling. Where we are now, where we have our own sewage plant, it would be completely pointless financially to put in rainwater recycling.
Right.
And there we are. I think MVHR, I think there is a financial return there. I did calculate that ventilating our house, there was about 140 kilograms of air per hour being moved in and out of the house in order to ventilate it and provide a comfortable environment. And that actually, 140 kilos of air does have quite a high heat content. So if you are bringing that in the winter without preheating it, which is what your MVHR does, then it must cost you some money. But I haven't calculated what the benefit is. The benefits are, as has been said, not really financial. It's all the other things.
Thanks, Ian. I'm going to sneak one last question for Shaun, with your hands-on approach to things. MVHR in a 2-storey house, how difficult is it to retrofit when no other major works planned? Does it need vents in every room?
Yes, it needs vents in every room, and that is always the challenge. So we have done it on ours, and actually in the older bit of the house, most of the vents are in the older bit of the house. You can do it, but you have to be quite brave, and it is very intrusive. So running pipes through stud walls is the way we did it upstairs, and then through the cavity between the floors, and just running along the beams. But we took out all our ceilings to do it.
Okay, that's very good. That brings us to the close of the 8 o'clock time. Thank you ever so much, our 3 speakers. If we could, well, round of applause, although we're all muted. Thank you very much.
I've got a few things to say to wind up the meeting, and Shaun could put up the relevant slides. Thank you. Good. So as the slide says, your next steps, we'd like to very much encourage you to think and get acting on your next steps in your carbon reduction journey. Quite a number of resources, and we've listed some of them on this slide. And when you get the package of materials by email, you'll be able to click on the relevant links and access these resources. Quite a number of them. One thing I'd particularly like to point out is that if you want some one-to-one advice from an expert on home energy, then do book a place at the Human Library, which we're running this coming Saturday, the 21st of October. The slide says 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. I thought it was 10 o'clock, but let's say 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. you'll be able to book time to talk to Ian Cray or Shaun and a range of other people who will be able to advise you on a one-to-one basis. So do think about doing that. Whichever actions you choose, do please get going on your home energy improvements. And next slide, please. And thank you very much if you've already donated to Open Eco Homes when you made your booking for this talk. Open Eco Homes is run as one of the projects of the charity Cambridge Carbon Footprint, and we invite you, we hope you will wish to donate to the Open Eco Homes programme so that it can continue in future years and provide inspiration to yet more people to get to work on improving their carbon footprint and within their homes. And you see a web link for the donations there. We'd also encourage you, please, to share your experiences of attending Open Eco Homes events on social media. There's a hashtag which you can see there, OEH 2023. Thank you very much for coming. It's the end of our formal proceedings, but we are very happy to keep the Zoom meeting open for a short while more, say up to another 15 minutes, if there are further questions to our speakers that you'd like to place. So we'll just stay online, and you're welcome to leave now, but if you want to try and continue with any questions, please stay around and we'll be here for another 15 minutes or so. Thank you very much for attending this evening. Goodbye.